You're over here acting your heart out, over-exaggerating, trying to be as comprehensible as possible, and you ask a question that you think is simple, and then anyone, there is a high chance that you are accidentally sabotaging your student discussion in the target language. But first, if this is our first time meeting, hello, my name is Maria Jernigan. I'm a high school Spanish teacher, and I teach 100% in the target language, both my students and me. That's right, even if they're in level 1. I'm also the CEO and founder of Redshift Education, and my passion really is getting students to use the language rather than memorize the language through technology, enhanced methods, project-based learning, and other proficiency. So if that sounds like something you would love to hang out for, please subscribe below. I would love to have you for the next one. I put out videos every single Monday. All right, so here are 5 ways that you're probably accidentally sabotaging your student discussion in the target language and what to do about it. All right, so way number 1 that you're probably accidentally sabotaging your students' target language discussion is you ask the question, you see the blank stares or the red muted mic icons, and you start to panic, or even just think, okay, no one's gonna answer, and then you move on way too quickly. Here's the thing. In regular circumstances, in person, in your first language, it takes 6 seconds between when someone says, does anyone have any questions, and when you finally come up with and ask a question. 6 seconds. So in a second language, you can imagine it takes about double that time, because your students, when you ask a question, even one that's pretty simple, it takes more processing power, which is slower than their first language, to figure out, what are you saying, and then to formulate a response, and then figure out if anyone else is going to respond, and then respond. It takes at least 12 seconds for that to happen. And that's in person. When you add Zoom or, Google Meet or whatever you're on, when you add video calls to the mix, you need to wait about 30 seconds between when you ask the question and when you move on. Because not only do they have to think of how to respond, they have to, in the second language that you're speaking, in the target language, they have to figure out what you said, formulate a response, come up with the confidence to give that response. And on Zoom, and even in the classroom with masks, we don't have 100% of the body language and the facial expressions that help us figure out the social cues of if you're about to speak, or if I'm about to speak, or if some other person on the call is about to speak. So that adds more delay, because you're trying to figure out, is this okay for me for my student? Your students are trying to figure out if it's an okay time for them to speak. And you add any possible lag on top of that, which means, the moment that you say it is probably not the moment that all of your students, especially in slower internet areas, that it's probably not the same moment that they hear it. It's gonna feel like an eternity. But wait 30 seconds after you ask your question. Now, that's super painful, or at least it can be, if you don't have some of these tips. So my go-to is keeping, water bottle or a mug or something off to the side. So I'll ask my question, pause for a second, and then, without saying anything else, without repeating the question, without going, no one, nothing else, just silence. I'll slowly kind of go for my drink, revert my eyes away from the camera, and drink. Take your time. If you've got a mug, that's even better, because you can kind of slowly and visually tilt the mug, right? Taking a sip of whatever drink you got kills some time, lets them think, feels less awkward. Another thing to remember is it probably feels awkward to you because you are the one trying to figure out if they're going to respond, right? Time is going to move a lot faster because you're not trying to A, come up with something to say, and B, process what was just said in the target language. So your students probably don't feel nearly as awkward as you might be inclined to feel when you first try this. So just kind of chill, wait it out. Some teachers like to do a little dance, or, whatever you want to do to fill the time. But the point is to make a lot of space for your students to be able to respond to your discussion question. if this still feels painful, if like waiting 30 seconds is like unfathomable, another thing you can do, and this is something that I do in the target language, is I will let my students know, like, hey, I'm going to ask you a question. It might take you a second to come up with something to say back. So how about this? I'm going to ask you the question, and we're just going to have think time. And then I'll ask for you to respond. That way you've kind of built in the expectation that there's going to be think time and that it's okay to have think time. And that will make the students feel more at ease if you're worried about them feeling awkward in that silence. The second way you're probably sabotaging your student discussion in the target language is your students probably don't find your discussion questions universally comprehensible. I know, this one's gonna sting, especially because, usually when we pose a discussion question, we as intentional, thoughtful, proficiency-based teachers, we design the questions to leverage the vocab and grammatical constructions that we've been targeting in class. So you would want everyone to understand the questions because it's what you've been working on in class. But sadly, or unfortunately, or realistically, and you know this just as much as I do, not every student progresses at the same rate, and not every student even walks into your classroom at the beginning of the year at the same level of proficiency. So just like we want to meet every student where they're at, all the time, think about your lowest proficiency level student. Are they really going to understand what this question is asking? If you're trying to rack your brain about a super easy way to boost the comprehensibility of anything you're saying in the target language, I highly recommend you watch this super quick 5-minute video about a quick tip for staying in the target language online while teaching from home. And I will say that it will work in the classroom too, especially a socially distanced one. And it doesn't take any prep at all, but it will get more engagement from the students who were quiet because they weren't totally sure they understood exactly what you were asking. All right, the third way that you are sabotaging your students' discussion in the target language, and the third way to fix and get your students to speak in the target language in discussion. It's natural in our first language, but especially a second language that we're learning, to take a pause mid-sentence and kind of search for a word or how to phrase a particular thing. This is super common. Now that I'm a Spanish teacher, I literally see this almost every single time a student speaks up. The trick is, as a teacher, you need to build a culture where there is so much space for that time. Do not jump in and finish the sentence of your student. Do not jump in and offer the word that you think that they're looking for. Even if you know exactly what the word is, even if you know that they would never come up with the word by themselves, I don't want you to jump in. For a while, at least. Here's why. I encourage my students to use what we call circumlocution, and you probably do too. You probably have this as a goal for your students as well. When you don't know a word, you use the words that you do know to kind of get your point across, even if you don't have the fancy word you're exactly looking for, right? So in my classroom, and this is how I build a culture of circumlocution, and this is something that is super easy and super comprehensible that I recommend you do too, is if a student is looking for a word, like this happened the other day, a student was looking for the word to sew, like sewing. And, she didn't know that word. So what I did, and I do this like 50 times a day, I'll go, usa las palabras que sabes. And then smile and like nod as they come up with words that they're thinking about. Usa las palabras que sabes. It's okay. Use the words that you know. When you build in that expectation that everyone's gonna need some extra time to think, but you can use the words that you do know to articulate a concept for a word you don't know, all of a sudden, you're not interrupting and finishing the sentences and becoming the dictionary all the time. Your students are practicing this critical skill of how to communicate without being, a dictionary. And that's a skill that we all use all the time. And it's useful to talk explicitly about that with your students outside of that moment where it happens. But seriously, broken record. Usa las palabras que sabes, and be mad encouraging. Not mad, be very encouraging. In that example I mentioned to you, my student was trying to say to sew, right? She was trying to say this weekend I was sewing, and she kind of had one of those moments that we've all seen when a student realizes, oh gosh, I don't know the word for that in Spanish. And in my classroom, 100% target language, they know better than to try to break into English with me, especially at that level. She's like a advanced student. So eventually she started describing things, and eventually we got out like ropa, hacer material, right? Or, sometimes, especially when we're teaching over Zoom, or any student, they'll just run off camera and grab the thing that they're trying to describe. And so what I recommend you do is, instead of giving them the word that they were looking for, instead of that, model for your students what it looks like to use the words that your students know to describe the thing that they were really trying to articulate. So that's when I said, oh, you're making clothes. Hacer ropa. Okay, that makes total sense to me. And I think the light bulb goes off in the student's head when they realize that all the words that you just said, they know. They could have said that too. And so it's really training them to not focus on words that they don't know, but using the words they do know. And then when they do it, celebrate a ton. Like, seriously, I think there's hardly any times I get more excited than when a student is kind of pausing and like looking for a word, and instead of giving up says, this, right? And like uses baby language to describe the concept that they're looking for. So I get up and down, I jump up and down, and you should too. To build this culture where they use the words that they know, you gotta celebrate when they do. The fourth thing to fix to get your students to actually stay in the target language during discussion is to take a look at what tools you're giving them to actually respond to your question. The concept of sentence starters is pretty well known in the language teaching community, but if you're unfamiliar, basically you're giving them the first couple of words that they need, whether that's the conjugated verb or, a phrase that they could use, and then ... and then they fill in the rest of the sentence so that when they're speaking, they can focus on formulating the answer, not formulating the answer with the grammar part that you're not really targeting. So that's what a sentence starter is, and I think you probably have used those in some form or another before, but here's what I want you to fix. You're probably, if you go and look at the sentence starters that you offer, you probably have a selection, 3 sentence starters for every discussion topic that you offer, and they're all at about the same level of difficulty. Here's the thing. If your students aren't 100,000,000% confident that they know what something means in the target language, there's no way that they're going to say it in front of their peers in class. They just aren't, because think about all the times that students accidentally say something that they don't mean to say in Spanish because of like a pronunciation error or something, and then everyone laughs, right? And so this is especially true in discussion in the target language. If the student is unsure that they really fully understand what that sentence starter says, there's no way they're going to finish the sentence starter and offer an original response. So something I suggest is include the most advanced all the way to the least advanced. And so it would look something like this. If you're talking about like your favorite hobby, and so maybe we're having a discussion about like your favorite pastimes or whatever, you could have a couple options for students to use to model off of if they want on the board. So you could have something like, for me, my favorite hobby is ... And then you could have something that says like, me gusta ... I like ... Me gusta, in this case in Spanish, is something that you hit hard in level 1. So a level 3 student is going to see me gusta, and that's going to be like the comfort blanket. Like, oh gosh, thank you. I know what that means. I can use that one. And then the third option is some students don't even need to speak in complete sentences for them to be comprehensible. So you could just offer like the blank with where they fill in the activity. What's your favorite hobby? Coser. To sew. The fifth way you might be sabotaging your target language discussion, and something to fix if you want to get your students to speak in the target language in discussion more often, is check to be sure that your discussion questions center around what your students actually care about, like centered around their actual lives. And this can be tricky for a lot of you. I know that, especially if you are a native speaker, you want to share your culture, where you come from, and regardless if you're native or not, you want to open their mind to other ways of life. And, literature in the target language, and cultural events and holidays of different countries that speak the target language. But here's the thing. If you're having a discussion about a novel that you're reading in the target language, and it's just about the characters or events in the book, it's not that relevant to your students. I know, no matter how much they like the book or you like the book. So what I really recommend is not to scrap your cultural lessons, not to scrap your literature that you have them read. No, of course not. I would never tell you how to teach your classes. But what I will say is if you can become more student-centered in your delivery of your content in a way called project-based learning in your language class, you will see a dramatic increase in the number of students speaking in the target language in discussion and the frequency at which they contribute. I've got a whole playlist about project-based learning, which I'll link right here. But if you're just getting started, something that you might want to start with is this video right here, which is 5 ideas or 5 ways to come up with ideas in project-based learning. Secondly, if you are interested in that tip I mentioned earlier about staying comprehensible with zero prep, you should watch the video right here. That's all for today. Thank you so much. Be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next Monday. Ciao for now.